There's this feeling that every single South African has. Every single day you wake up, you know that there's going to be bad news. The government is undoubtedly going to do another thing that either worsens the economy, destroys government, destroys services, basically just makes everything worse. And you kind of know for a fact that fuel prices are always going to go up, right? Because that's just what happens. I say this because last night I had to go put fuel in my car because the price has once again increased. It's always lovely. But being a South African, the point is you're getting used to, or at least you're used to getting bad news pretty much on standard. The only good news we ever get in South Africa is from the rugby team and most recently from the cricket team as well. Everything else is pretty much just always bad. Just want to say a huge thank you to all of the supporters and patrons of this channel. By becoming a member or a patron, you help support the news that we bring and also allow me to do even more in the future. So huge shout out to all of you. Thank you. Anyways, enjoy the video. Bye. There is something that has started to happen, and this really kicked off when Russia decided to invade Ukraine, where the South African government would continuously position itself against the West. It would continuously position itself on the side of the aggressor to, almost against the other side, or just continuously take the position of whatever wasn't the position of the West. Most recently, I remember covering this this was like a few months ago at this point. I don't know if you guys remember, but South Africa was firmly on the side of Russia, insofar as we even denied President Zelensky access to South Africa at the early days of the war. Then President Trump gets into power. Now remember, while the Biden administration was very much pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia, the Trump administration was a lot less pro-Ukraine. They weren't exactly pro-Russia either, but they were a lot less pro-Ukraine and a lot more, both of you just need to stop doing this. We've had enough of the children playing now. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, the South African government goes, never mind. Zelensky, welcome. Welcome to the country. We'd love to have you. So it genuinely does feel as if the South African government, it's not so much that they just continuously choose the wrong side in every single conflict. It's more a case of whatever the US chooses to back, the South African government will automatically choose the other side. This gets particularly jarring when you realize that the United States is not exactly an unknown quantity for South Africa. We do quite a bit of trade with South Africa, and while we don't do anywhere near as much trade with America, as we do with China, the thing that needs to be remembered is that the vast majority of businesses as well, businesses that create jobs, businesses that create GDP and GDP growth are all American companies. Everywhere you turn, there's a KFC on every corner. There's a McDonald's on every corner. All of these companies are owned by American companies. So should America, for any given reason, decide to sanction South Africa, there are hundreds of companies and products that would cease to exist immediately within South Africa. Not to mention that even when you do look at this sort of chart here, right, Europe would almost certainly follow suit. Why? Because usually the way sanctions work is one country doesn't just choose to sanction another country in isolation. That country will sanction a country. So America, for example, will sanction South Africa, but then demand that any country or region that wants to do business with America follow in those sanctions or else face sanctions from the Americans as well. This would almost certainly mean that the Europeans, who largely, it should be mentioned, both for America and Europe, only really trade with South Africa as a gesture of goodwill. It's not as if they can't get any of the products that we make from somewhere else. And it's also not as if we are one of the largest markets, as seen by the most recent closure of the Mercedes-Benz factory in South Africa. So Europe would not risk the ire of America in order to continue trading with South Africa, especially when this is the kind of stuff that the South African government engages in. Iran is no friend of the West. That includes America as well as Europe. The Iranians are on record, the Ayatollah, as saying that they would like to see the complete destruction of both America and Europe. So if America were to impose sanctions on South Africa because of the South African government's refusal to just stay neutral, I'm not even suggesting here that we should, embrace America and absolutely condemn Iran. If you don't want to do that, that's fine, but then remain neutral, right? Don't go and sign the book of condolences following not the massive loss of life in Iran, because that's not what happened, following the destruction of Iran's uranium enrichment facilities. Now, it should be mentioned, Iran was not enriching this uranium for public use or for societal use or in the use of electricity. They were doing it to build bombs. How do we know this? Because Iran themselves have admitted that they have gone way beyond the level of what would be required in terms of enrichment for mere power generation. A lot of their uranium now sits at about 60% enriched. That's when you get to bomb-making levels. And Iran, again, have said that they want nukes because they want to nuke Israel. It is as simple as that. For us to not only do this, but we don't even do this in silence. We make a photo op out of it. We have a whole, run around of going, oh, look at us. We're signing the book of condolences saying we're so sorry that you can no longer build nukes in order to nuke the Jews that live in Israel. That to me is just beyond bonkers. And then when you actually go and you look at the South African voters and how they feel about Iran and Israel and Hamas and Israel, it's actually quite insane. So I found this poll by the Social Research Foundation, and they went around and they basically asked a bunch of people, how do you feel? It's 1,204 people that were asked in 2024. How do you feel about political parties that back either Israel or Hamas? They did this by race, by education, by party affiliation, and then they asked the opposite question, supporting Hamas, supporting Israel, or opposing Israel, and they found pretty much the same thing. Their conclusion across all of this is the data reflects a previous foundation poll insight that South African voters have an aversion to political parties that talk about the Israel-Hamas war. In other words, South Africans would prefer if their political parties merely focused on issues at home. We have enough of those going around. The last thing we need is the United States slapping sanctions on the South African government, the South African government being sanctioned by the US would not bother any of us, because that would just mean President Ramaphosa loses all of the money that he stacked away everywhere else. But if they were to impose sanctions on South Africa, especially of the level that we see in Russia, it would bring the South African economy to a standstill overnight. Remember, South Africa is far away from the rest of the world. A lot of our ships and a lot of our cargo is only able to sail because of American protection. If the Americans suddenly decided that they will no longer protect South African imports and exports, a lot of countries will immediately stop exporting to South Africa because their ships and the safety of their ships cannot be guaranteed. And that would be disastrous, because you can imagine, right? You have a ship filled with over R1 billion worth of vehicles. The last thing you want is some Houthi pirates getting their hands on that. And now suddenly all of those vehicles have to be written off. So South Africa is playing a very dangerous game. And it doesn't seem like the South African government has any interest in stopping. Whatever they can do to antagonize the Americans appears to just be their go-to at this point. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the goal of all of this is. You throw into that the South African government has known about the four main things that the American government demands of South Africa in order to sort of restore bilateral relations between the countries for weeks now, and they have not informed the South African public. It's troubling, to say the very least. Anyways, let me know in the comment section down below how you feel on this entire situation. As always, hit the like if you liked, the dislike if you didn't, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Peace.